Have you ever met someone whose heart had already buried hope, only to watch one act of kindness change everything? In the spring of 1885, in the lonely mountain settlement of Cedar Ridge, Colorado Territory, a young widow believed her future had ended the day her husband died. But when a quiet cowboy stopped his horse outside her weathered fence and made a promise no one else dared to make, neither of them realized that love was only the beginning, because a deadly secret buried in the mountains was about to destroy every lie the town had chosen to believe. If you enjoy heartfelt Western romances filled with mystery, courage, and hope, welcome to Nordic Love Stories. Sarah Whitmore stood beside an old wooden washtub before sunrise. Her sleeves rolled above her elbows as icy water soaked her tired hands. The crisp mountain air carried the scent of pine and melting snow, while golden sunlight slowly crept across the distant peaks. Once she had lived in the largest ranch house in the valley, but now she survived by washing other families' clothes for a few silver coins. Every movement revealed quiet dignity, even though grief had settled deep inside her heart. Ethan Brooks guided his bay horse along the narrow road, slowing as he reached the little cottage. For nearly a month he had chosen this same route into town, pretending it was only the shortest path, though he knew the truth. Every morning he found himself hoping Sarah might smile, even if only for a second. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitmore," he called gently. Sarah looked up from the washtub, brushing a loose strand of dark hair behind her ear, before answering with careful politeness. "Good morning, Mr. Brooks." Ethan rested one hand on his saddle horn and admired the sunrise glowing across the mountains. "Beautiful morning," he said quietly. Sarah gave a faint smile that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. Beautiful mornings don't always change difficult lives. Her words carried the weight of months spent alone. Ethan hesitated before speaking again. "Maybe they can be the beginning of something better." Sarah lowered her eyes. "You should know something before you keep stopping here." She folded a damp blanket with slow, steady hands. "I'm a widow." The sentence sounded rehearsed, spoken too many times to strangers who immediately walked away afterward. Ethan remained silent for a moment before answering. "Then perhaps life owes you a new beginning instead of another goodbye." Sarah stared at him, surprised by an answer she had never expected. He continued softly. "A woman with your strength shouldn't have to carry every burden alone forever." Before Sarah could reply, the church bell echoed across Cedar Ridge, reminding them that another ordinary day had begun. Neither of them realized that the greatest danger facing her had nothing to do with loneliness. 8 months earlier, her husband, Daniel Whitmore, had supposedly died after falling from his horse near Blackstone Pass. The sheriff declared it an unfortunate accident. The town mourned him, and life moved forward. Only Sarah remained trapped between grief and unanswered questions. Daniel's older brother, Victor Whitmore, had wasted little time challenging her right to inherit the ranch, claiming an old territorial law favored blood relatives over childless widows. He convinced the local court to freeze every acre of land until judges reached a final decision. Overnight, Sarah lost nearly everything except the tiny cottage where she now lived. Ethan had arrived in Cedar Ridge 6 months earlier after leaving Kansas behind forever. The woman he planned to marry had died from scarlet fever before their wedding, teaching him that tomorrow was never guaranteed. Instead of becoming bitter, he devoted himself to honest work, building a modest cattle ranch and earning the respect of neighbors through quiet kindness rather than loud promises. Yet every morning his thoughts returned to the widow, whose courage seemed greater than her sorrow. As he tipped his hat and prepared to ride toward town, he noticed someone watching from the distant tree line. A rider, dressed in a long black coat, quickly disappeared among the pines the moment Ethan looked his way. Sarah never saw him. But before another sunrise arrived, that mysterious stranger would force both of their lives onto a path from which neither could ever turn back. The following morning arrived beneath a sky washed pale blue by the cool mountain air, but peace did not last long in Cedar Ridge. Ethan could not forget the unknown rider who had vanished into the pine trees. Long before sunrise, he saddled his horse and returned to the road near Sarah's cottage, hoping the stranger had simply been a traveler passing through. Instead, he found fresh hoofprints circling the property. Someone had ridden around the little house during the night without ever knocking on the door. The tracks ended near the fence before disappearing toward Blackstone Pass. Ethan's instincts warned him that this was no coincidence. When Sarah stepped outside carrying another basket of laundry, she noticed the concern on his face. "Something is wrong?" she asked quietly. Ethan pointed toward the ground. "You had a visitor last night." Sarah's expression slowly changed. "I heard a horse after midnight, but I thought I was dreaming." Together they followed the tracks until they disappeared on rocky ground where nothing more could be read. As they returned to the cottage, an older ranch hand approached from the road. His name was Jacob Turner, a man who had worked beside Daniel Whitmore for years before leaving the ranch shortly after the funeral. His weathered face carried the look of someone burdened by a secret for far too long. "Mr. Brooks," Jacob said nervously, glancing toward Sarah, "I need a private word." Sarah nodded and stepped inside, sensing the conversation concerned her late husband. Jacob waited until the door closed before speaking. "I should have come months ago, but I was afraid." Ethan folded his arms. "Afraid of what?" Jacob lowered his voice. "The morning Daniel died, I found something that never sat right with me." Ethan listened without interrupting. "His saddle strap wasn't torn from age," Jacob continued. "It had been sliced clean with a sharp knife. I've repaired saddles my entire life. Leather doesn't break that way by accident." Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken. "Did you tell the sheriff?" Jacob nodded slowly. He barely looked at it. Victor Whitmore was standing beside him the whole time, insisting Daniel's horse had simply stumbled. The sheriff closed the case before sunset. Ethan looked toward Sarah's cottage, realizing her doubts had been right from the beginning. Jacob reached into his coat and carefully removed a small silver pocket watch. "I found this near the ravine 2 days after the funeral," he whispered. "It belonged to Daniel, but I never gave it back because something inside frightened me." Ethan opened the watch and discovered a folded piece of paper hidden beneath the inner cover. The writing had faded, but several words remained clear enough to read. "Water. It writes, meeting, don't trust Victor." Ethan read the sentence twice before looking back at Jacob. Neither man spoke for several seconds. At that moment, Sarah stepped outside carrying 3 cups of fresh coffee, unaware that the truth about her husband's death had begun to reveal itself. Ethan slipped the note back into the watch and gently handed it to her. "This belonged to Daniel," he said. Sarah's hands trembled as she recognized the watch instantly. Tears filled her eyes, but before she could ask where it had been, the sound of galloping horses echoed across the valley. 3 riders appeared at the far end of the road. Leading them was Victor Whitmore himself, his cold eyes locked onto the silver watch resting in Sarah's hands, and for the first time since Daniel's funeral, genuine fear crossed his face. Ethan immediately understood one thing. Victor hadn't come to comfort his brother's widow. He had come to recover something he believed had disappeared forever. Victor pulled his horse to a stop only a few feet from the cottage, his 2 riders remaining silently behind him. For a brief moment no one spoke. The mountain wind carried dust across the yard, while Sarah stood frozen with Daniel's silver watch clutched tightly in her hands. Victor forced a calm smile that never reached his eyes. "That watch belongs to the Whitmore family," he said evenly. "I'll take it now." Sarah looked directly at him. "It belonged to my husband." Victor stretched out his hand. "Then return it, Sarah. There's nothing inside that concerns you anymore." Ethan stepped forward before she could answer. "If there's nothing important in it, why ride across the valley with 2 men just to collect an old pocket watch?" Victor's expression hardened. "This is family business, Mr. Brooks." Ethan never moved. The moment someone starts threatening a widow, it becomes everyone's business. Silence settled over the yard. Victor realized intimidation alone would not work. Without another word, he turned his horse and rode away. But before disappearing down the trail, he looked back, once his cold eyes promising the matter was far from over. That evening, Ethan, Sarah, and Jacob carefully examined the folded note again beneath the warm glow of an oil lamp. Jacob suddenly remembered something he had ignored months earlier. "Daniel wasn't arguing about cattle before he died," he said quietly. "He discovered someone had been secretly diverting water from the upper creek. Whoever controlled that water would own the richest grazing land in the valley." Sarah slowly lifted her eyes. "Victor's ranch borders the upper creek." Ethan nodded. Daniel must have learned the truth, and someone decided he would never return from Blackstone Pass. Early the next morning they rode together toward the abandoned line cabin mentioned in Daniel's old ranch journal. Hidden beneath a loose floorboard, they discovered a leather ledger filled with dates, payments, and signed agreements, proving Victor had illegally redirected water and bribed several men to remain silent. Tucked inside the final page was Daniel's unfinished letter addressed to the territorial judge, explaining everything he intended to expose before his sudden death. Sarah could barely breathe as she read her husband's familiar handwriting. Tears rolled down her face, not from grief alone, but because after 8 long months his voice had finally reached her again. Ethan gently rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. "He never stopped fighting for you," he said softly. "Now we'll finish what he started." Within days, the evidence reached the territorial authorities. A new investigation reopened Daniel Whitmore's death, and witnesses who had remained silent finally found the courage to speak. Faced with overwhelming proof, Victor confessed that he had cut Daniel's saddle strap, hoping the fatal fall would look like nothing more than a tragic accident. He was arrested before the court could award him the ranch he had spent years trying to steal. Weeks later, the judge officially restored every acre of the Whitmore property to Sarah, yet the greatest victory was not the land. It was the peace that finally replaced the questions she had carried every day since Daniel's death. As summer settled across Cedar Ridge, Ethan repaired the old front fence while Sarah planted fresh wildflowers beside the cottage porch. She walked toward him with a gentle smile that no longer hid behind sadness. "The first morning you stopped here," she whispered, "I believed my story had already ended." Ethan smiled beneath the warm Colorado sun. "No," he answered softly, taking her hand in his. It was only waiting for a better chapter to begin. Their hands remained together as the mountain breeze carried the scent of pine through the valley, proving that even after the darkest loss, kindness, courage, and love can lead 2 broken hearts toward a beautiful new beginning. Thank you for spending this journey with Nordic Love Stories. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes hope can change a life.